Right. So I want to start today with a mental image that it actually stopped me cold while I was reading through the stack for this deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
It's about how we see ourselves. We spend decades curating this thing we call our personality, our quirks, our humor, how we handle a crisis.
The specific way you order coffee.
Exactly. All those little traits, we think of that as us. But the material we're covering today it flips that whole idea on its head. It suggests that what we call personality isn't who we are. It argues that personality is a scar.
It's a pretty visceral metaphor to start with, isn't it?
It really is.
The core premise here is that the personality structure, the specific way you interact with the world, is actually tissue that is formed over a wound.
A deep, invisible wound that most of us don't even realize is there.
Precisely.
And the sources are very specific about naming this wound. They don't just use vague terms like trauma or, a bad childhood. They identify the root injury as shame. But we need to pause here because when I hear shame, I think about tripping in public or realizing I have spinach in my teeth on a date. That kind of embarrassment.
Right.
That's not what these papers are talking about, is it?
No, not at all. And that's the first major hurdle here. And, common language, shame is an emotion. It washes over you, you blush, and then it passes.
Sure.
But the sources define this type of shame not as an emotion, but as a structural belief about your identity. It's the crucial difference between the thought, I did something bad, and the belief, I am bad.
I am bad or I'm wrong. Wow, that feels infinitely heavier than just a mistake.
It is. It creates a rupture in what the text calls innocence. If you watch a toddler, or even an animal, they just exist. They're in a state of pure being.
Yeah.
They aren't questioning their right to take up space.
They're not auditioning for their dinner.
Exactly. They aren't wondering if they're good enough. They just are.
Yeah.
But the argument here is that for almost all of us, at some point, that innocence fractures.
The moment we realize we're being watched.
Yes. The moment we realize we can be judged, that our safety or love might be conditional, and the brain makes this catastrophic calculation. Simply being me isn't safe. I need to be something else to survive.
And that's when the scar starts to form. We stop being and start performing.
Right.
So if I'm getting this, the personality is the performance we design to cover up that feeling of being fundamentally flawed. But how does that stick? Why doesn't it just go away when we grow up?
Because the belief I am flawed changes how the brain itself processes information.
Oh.
This is where the research on confirmation bias gets really, really interesting.
Okay.
Once that core belief, I am wrong, takes root, it stops being just a thought. It becomes a filter for your entire reality. Your brain basically acts like a prosecutor building a case against you.
It's rigging the jury.
Aggressively rigging it.
Yeah.
If you walk into a party and 10 people smile at you, but one person gives you a sideways look,
You only remember the one.
a shame-based brain deletes the 10 smiles. It locks onto that one frown as absolute proof. See, I knew it, I'm unlovable. It actively ignores evidence of your worth because that evidence conflicts with the core identity.
That explains so much. It's why you can't just compliment someone out of low self-esteem. You're just throwing data at a system that's programmed to reject it.
You're fighting their fundamental logic.
Right.
And this leads to the structural consequence the sources talk about.
Yeah.
If the core belief is, I am wrong, the behavior becomes, I must hide.
Right.
The self collapses inward. It seeks invisibility because if you believe you're fundamentally bad, then being seen is dangerous.
Okay, so that's the classic view of shame, the hiding, the shrinking. That makes sense. But this is where the research took a turn that, I'll be honest, I really struggled with at first. We always think of pride as the opposite of shame.
Of course.
If I feel bad, I should try to feel proud. But these sources argue that pride is actually the same injury.
This is the inverse injury concept, and it is probably the most radical takeaway from this entire stack. We tend to see it as a line, right? Shame on the negative end, pride on the positive end.
Yeah, a spectrum.
But structurally, this analysis argues they are identical. They're both just defenses against the reality of being.
Walk me through that, because it feels very counterintuitive. Are we saying feeling good about yourself is a pathology?
Well, we have to be super strict with our definitions here. The text makes a very sharp distinction between confidence and pride.
Okay.
Confidence, according to these sources, is just knowing what's true. It's grounded in reality. If you can lift 100 pounds and you say, I can lift 100 pounds, that's confidence.
It's just physics.
It's just data. It doesn't need anyone else to fail for you to succeed. But pride, Pride is grounded in compensation.
Uh-huh.
For pride to exist, there has to be a comparison. There must be a hierarchy. It's not enough to say, I am smart. Pride needs, I am smarter than him.
So confidence is standing on the ground, and pride is climbing a ladder where you have to step on someone to get higher.
And you have to keep looking down to make sure they're still below you. That's what verifies your position. So think about the logic. Shame says, I am what is wrong, so the strategy is collapse, hide.
Invisibility.
Pride says, I am what is right, so the strategy is to dominate, to inflate outward. But both are just reactions to the same underlying terror, which is, if I'm just myself, I'll be destroyed.
So, the person hiding in their room feeling worthless and the person dominating the boardroom with a massive ego.
We're running the same operating system.
No.
They're running the same code, just different subroutines. The text calls the pride side defensive grandiosity. When the shame is just too painful to bear, the psyche flips the script. It decides, no, wait, everyone else is wrong. I am the special one.
It's a survival strategy.
It's a way to keep the wound from bleeding, but it doesn't heal it. It just builds a fortress over it. It's still an identity filter, just, facing a different direction.
And this connects right back to that idea of personality as a mask. The sources use this phrase, narrative interface, which sounds a bit techie.
A little bit. Yeah.
But it's really it's the character we build, the funny guy, the high achiever, the caretaker. We send that character out to deal with the world so the real wounded self doesn't have to get hurt.
It's a proxy war.
Yeah.
We let the mask take the hits.
Yeah.
But the tragedy, and the text is quite dark on this point, is that society rewards the mask, specifically the pride mask.
That's the socially approved dissociation idea?
Yes. If your shame response is to hide and be depressed, society calls that a pathology. We say you're sick. We suggest therapy, medication.
Right.
But if your shame response is to become a workaholic, to accumulate status, to step on people to get to the top pace, society often calls that leadership.
We put the pride injury on the cover of magazines.
We do. We confuse health with successful defense mechanisms. If you're hyper-competitive, obsessed with status, you're just as disconnected from your true self as the person who can't get out of bed.
But your disconnection looks like power, so nobody steps in.
In fact, our economic systems rely on that disconnection. They run on the fuel of not enoughness.
Which makes pride so resilient against any kind of treatment. It's hard to heal someone when the world is applauding their symptoms. Oh, you're obsessed with being the best. Here's a promotion. Why would I ever want to fix that?
You wouldn't. Not until it breaks. And this is why the sources argue that pride is so much harder to treat than shame. Shame feels like suffering. People walk into therapy saying, help me, I hurt.
But pride feels like control.
It feels like strength. If you try to tell a person operating from defensive pride that they are wounded, they don't hear an offer of help. They hear an attack on their entire existence.
We defend the mask.
At all costs.
Yeah.
Because they believe the mask is the only thing keeping them alive.
Okay, so that leads us right into the section on the mental health system itself. I found this part pretty blistering. The sources argue that psychiatry often fails because it's trying to treat the symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, without ever addressing the root identity fracture.
The argument is that the system focuses on what's measurable and behavioral.
Right.
We're treating the smoke, not the fire. The text points out that, especially in the U.S., when these wounds manifest strongly, they get labeled as personality disorders.
Narcissism, borderline, things like that.
Exactly. And the prognosis for those is often listed as poor.
They're often called untreatable, right? Like it's the patient's fault.
But the source material flips that. It argues that a personality disorder is actually a highly functional adaptation to shame. It's a very thick suit of armor. The problem comes when a clinician tries to dismantle that armor. The patient resists, obviously.
Of course.
And this is a fascinating psychological insight, the clinician often feels their own shame.
Wait, the therapist takes it personally?
Clinicians are human. They have an identity, too. I am a helper. I am an expert. If the patient doesn't get better, that identity is threatened. The clinician feels ineffective. So, to protect their own ego, the blame gets shifted to the patient. I'm not a bad doctor. You're a bad patient.
The system cannot heal what it refuses to understand. That's the quote that jumped out at me. If the doctor's wearing a mask of professional expert and the patient has a mask of defensive narcissist.
You just have two masks bumping into each other. There's no real contact.
And that's why people can spend years in the system without fundamental change. They might learn better coping skills, better ways to polish the mask.
But the wound underneath remains untouched because adulthood itself is shame normalized. We're all used to everyone performing. Someone who stops, who's just real, can actually be very unsettling.
So let's talk about the solution. Because if the problem is this deep, you can't just medicate it away. The sources use this term epistemological repair.
Sounds academic.
I'll be honest, my eyes almost glazed over. It sounds like you need a philosophy degree, but what does it actually mean?
It sounds complex, but it's really logical. Epistemology is just the study of how we know what we know. The source argues that the wound isn't medical. It's a logic error.
A false premise?
A false premise that the person has built their entire life on. The premise is, my worth is conditional. I must earn the right to exist.
So healing isn't about making the person feel better, it's about correcting the math. Proving the premise is a lie.
Exactly. The goal isn't to take a person with low self-esteem and give them high self-esteem.
Which is. That's usually the goal. Boost your self-esteem. We hear that everywhere.
But think about what self-esteem implies. It's still a judgment, an evaluation. I am good because I achieved X. It's still a performance. It's unstable, because if you lose X, you lose the esteem. The sources argue for something more radical, dissolving identity.
Dissolving it, that sounds terrifying. It sounds like dying.
It sounds like death to the ego, and in a way, it is. But the goal is to get back to that organismic state we talked about at the beginning, innocence.
Being without belief.
Yes.
Yeah.
You stop asking, am I good or am I bad? And you just are. You become, and this is the phrase the text uses, unbiased in perception.
What does that feel like?
Think about how much energy you spend defending your image. If someone insults you, you spend hours ruminating, crafting a comeback, feeling small. That's all energy spent maintaining the mask. If you dissolve the need for that constructed identity, the insult just passes through you.
It's just noise.
It's just data. Oh, that person is angry. It doesn't hook into anything because there's no Velcro. There is no me that needs to be defended. The text describes the healed individual as unthreatened by truth.
Unthreatened by truth, that is a high bar.
It's the ultimate freedom, isn't it? If I don't need to be special to exist, that I can admit when I'm wrong without falling apart. I can see your success without it feeling like my failure. The competitive tension of the world just evaporates.
But is that practical? I mean, we live in a world that demands an identity. We have jobs, LinkedIn profiles. Can you actually function without a self?
The sources suggest you function better, but differently. You still have a personality, preferences, humor, but you aren't attached to it. It's a tool you use, not a cage you live in. And crucially, you become resistant to manipulation.
Because you can't be bribed with status.
Exactly. Marketing, politics, corporate culture, they all hook into our shame or our pride. Buy this and you'll be important. Vote for this or you're a bad person. A person who's done this epistemological repair doesn't have those hooks.
They become, as the text says, incompatible with systems built on shame.
Which makes them a little dangerous to the system, yes, but peaceful to themselves. It completely changes the definition of success. Success isn't, look what I built. It's, look what I no longer need to pretend to be.
And that forces us to look at our own lives and ask, how much of what I do is genuine, and how much is just scar tissue trying to cover up that old wound?
It's the difference between acting from inspiration and acting from desperation. And most of us, unfortunately, are running on desperation disguised as ambition.
So let's try to wrap this up, because we've covered a lot of ground. We started with the idea that personality is often just a defense mechanism, a scar.
A scar covering the core belief that we're fundamentally flawed. And that fracture splits into two main directions. Shame, where we hide.
And pride, where we perform. But both are just identity maintenance. They're ways to avoid the vulnerability of just being human.
Right. And we saw why it's so hard to fix, because society rewards the pride mask. We give promotions to the scar tissue.
And the mental health system is often too caught up in its own structures to get to the root of the problem.
And finally, we looked at the cure. Not improvement, but dissolution. Unlearning the logic that says we have to earn our existence.
It's a challenge, then, to the listener. Next time you feel that flash of defensiveness or that urge to impress someone or that sinking feeling that you aren't enough,
just catch it. Ask yourself, is this really me? Or is this the scar talking? Is this confidence? Or is this my wound trying to protect itself?
because the sources are pretty clear. The you that you were so afraid of exposing, it was never broken in the first place. It was just buried under a lifetime of trying to be someone else.
And the only way to find it is to stop performing and let the mask fall.
I want to leave everyone with the final provocation from the source material because it haunts me in a good way. It asks, if you stripped away your job title, your bank balance, your reputation, your cleverness, and your history, if you stopped performing, stopped defending, and stopped needing to be special. Who or what would be left?
Mm.
The text suggests that whatever remains is the only thing about you that is actually real. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
See you next time.